Yes, I'm still in my PJs, but it is like 6 a.m. and this is a women's morning devotional. So I figured coffee, Bible, PJs, that was the atmosphere anyway, right? But like, let's do like a little intro. Hi, my name is Faith. Welcome to How to Faith a Life. This is my channel here. I never know if I should like say my name because I don't know if I really have any new people on my channel. This is the space on YouTube for Christian mamas, Christian in-depth Bible studies, women's morning devotionals like this one, just kind of all those good things. And this is a series through James, kind of Bible study with me through James. Right now we're just going like verse section by verse section through James 1. And the plan is to do the whole book, which is crazy because that seems like it's going to take us forever right now. We did James 1 through 4 last week. This week we're doing James 1, 5 through 8. And last week we talked a lot about perseverance through trials. This week it's more ask God for wisdom. Hang out to the end of this video to hear how a lot of people, Christians included, don't really know how to doubt properly. Ooh, what do I mean there? You're gonna have to wait and see. But just a quick review for our in-depth Bible study series, kind of like the context. Remember, this is the first church, like Jesus has just died for our sins on the cross, resurrected, and now it's like, okay, let's start a church. We don't know what that looks like. We're all new believers. And this is Jesus's half brother. And he is writing to the churches dispersed. They're under a lot of persecution. They're going through a lot of poverty and they're going through a lot of trials. And so it's important whenever we read this to kind of keep that in the back of our mind. So let's dive in, okay? If you need wisdom, ask our generous God and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. For when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world. They are unstable in everything they do. This verse has had a lot of impact, even just like in my recent life. When I was preparing for this video like 2 weeks ago, and we were talking a lot about it, we've been going through our own trials in our own life. And that was one of the things that we were like, okay, in God's word, we see James 1, ask for wisdom and it will be given to you. Just ask in faith. And that's exactly what it says. But it's important to see here context. So again, they're being persecuted. This is the young, early church, early believers. They're going through a lot of hardship. And James is not just like, if you need wisdom, even though that's what our translations say, it's really not if you need wisdom. It's like if you have an awareness that you need wisdom, because everybody needs wisdom. And so basically what he's saying here is like,
you're gonna need wisdom. Here's what you do.
You're gonna need wisdom in your trials, because again, context, we have to remember that it's really wisdom in your trials, wisdom to get through trials, which we all are facing. If God gives us the trials, he's also going to provide the wisdom to persevere through those trials with obedience and faith. But if you aren't a believer and you just want to make more money and you're not really facing any trials and you don't know Jesus, that promise isn't really for you, to be honest. And so it's really important that we read these scriptures in context. Okay, wait, hold out. I know I way over explained there. Stephen Cole explains really well. If you lack wisdom, really is like a good way of better translated in our own language of more like, we all need wisdom, but not all of us know we need God's wisdom, if that makes sense. So if you lack God's wisdom on what to do in your trial, James is giving us the advice on how to seek wisdom so that we can persevere through trials with joy, like we talked about last week. If you haven't watched that video, you should probably go watch that video. It's also important to note, like we talked about last week, that James was the first book of the New Testament. So like they didn't have any other New Testament scriptures to work off of. He works off a lot of the Old Testament here. And so his wordage of wisdom is based off of that Old Testament usage. And wisdom there was a lot about skill, like skill for decision making and like leading groups and being a leader and stewardship of one's life and possessions and being. So that's kind of like the idea of wisdom. So James here is referring to that kind of wisdom and he's saying, if you need that, ask God. He will give us that wisdom that will root us in God's love and in obedience to his word, even in the midst of hardship. And so that's what he's encouraging his congregation towards. Seek God, ask for his wisdom, and not only will it help you persevere through trials with joy, but also with obedience, even in the midst of intense trials. And again, if you haven't, you should definitely go watch last week's video because we talk about how he really truly lived that out, even to the point of his death. Okay, I know I've made a video about Jesus and coffee culture, but like I really love coffee. Okay, back to the Bible study. So in verse 5, we see, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God. We already talked about that. He'll give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. And so we see that he is just like this underlying desire that any kind of wisdom is not going to work. We need the wisdom from God. That is the best wisdom. And that wisdom only comes through asking for it in prayer. And there's an important thing I should note here is there is a difference between wisdom and knowledge, okay? So wisdom, like we talked about, is skill, decision-making, leading a group, stewarding your life. It really is more like decision-based. Knowledge is, God, tell me what door to walk through. Door 1, 2, or 3. Just write it in the clouds. I'll follow. And that's not what he's talking about here. You know, if you think about it, we don't want God just to tell us what to do. Oh, just click door number 2. Oh, I don't know. I can't think of another easy example. Oh, just click door number 2. Just buy house number B, whatever. We don't really truly at the end of the day want an answer. What we do want is that wisdom. We want the ability to decision make. Look at Samuel when he was deciding between the 2 moms. And they both were claiming the same baby. And he said, you know what? We'll just kill the baby. And he knew in wisdom that he received from God that the true mom would say, no, don't kill the baby, let her have it. So when we're asking the Lord for wisdom, don't have the expectation to then walk away, stand up from your prayers and walk away and see the answer written in the clouds. No, he's going to give you decision-making skills to lead people in the moment. The Holy Spirit is alive and working through his word, through the clouds. You know, there are exceptions to this, but I think it's important for us to realize that sometimes we kind of idealize knowing the answer to something and we forget that what's really truly more valuable is the wisdom to make a decision and be able to continually make wise decisions. Does that make sense? To have God's wisdom, to live in God's wisdom rather than just like, oh, I know what to do only in this circumstance. I hope this is making sense. It is really early in the morning. Having a hard time describing what I'm trying to say. Let's pull back up. What was I going to say? Okay. And then also for verse 5, I promise I'm not just going to hang out on verse 5 this whole Bible study, but there's a lot here. So it says, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God. He will give it to you. A few other translations use, he'll give it generously to all who believe. The all there, of course, in context, we see that it's believers. This is written to believers. And so, you know, we might see when we look into the world, someone's really good and really wise. We love watching Shark Tank. I don't know if you've watched that show, but it seems like the sharks on Shark Tank are so business wise. They know how to make decisions. They can just listen to it. Sorry, my bun keeps falling. Let me just, I can tie my hair without a hair tie. It's like my secret skill that I'm very proud of. Yeah, what were we talking about? Okay, Shark Tank. So the sharks, they know how to like make really great business decisions. They have a lot of wisdom. You can just pitch them a random business and immediately they'll be able to tell you like really awesome wise stuff. But there is a difference between earthly wisdom and God's wisdom. Like I was saying, the best wisdom is the wisdom that we receive from God that we ask through prayer. We might be tempted to think along the same track as the world's wisdom, but the best wisdom is the wisdom that we receive from God through prayer. The creator of the universe is offering you wisdom. I think that's better than the Shark Tank wisdom. You know what I mean? And so it's important to just see, he's saying to all believers, if you ask me, I'm a good father. I'm going to give you good things. I'm going to give you that wisdom that you ask for. And then let me see who it is. It's Peter Davids says really well that the part that says like God's not going to have any reservations backing it without reproach, without any reservations, means like without any mental reservations. Like he's like, of course. That's like asking your father, can I breathe some air? It's like, of course. Like I have no part of me that's like, maybe I won't give you wisdom. No, God is like, of course, you are my child. Of course I will give you my wisdom. There's, there's no question about it. You're going to get it, you know? And so I think that's important to see God's heart in it, is he wants us to ask and he wants to give. And I don't know how to better show you that I'm a spaz. Maybe the coffee's kicking in. So that's what we see here is like he wants to give us that wisdom. He's not going to rebuke us for needing that wisdom. He understands that we need it, and he's more than ready to give it to us. And finally, we see in verse 6, I think, but when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. I love that imagery because that is totally how I feel when I'm on my period. And so I totally see how the Lord would be like, girl, you're being a wave tossed in the sea, going to and fro with just whatever the world says. Well, the world says, let's use that Shark Tank example. The world says I really need to stop having my business, but maybe God's leading me to still have my business, whatever. I don't know. This is a bad example, but y'all get what I'm saying. Like how we can just be like thrown and tossed but by like every little thing that we hear from the world. And if we are dialed into the Lord's wisdom, and again, what is that? That's skill, that's decision making, that's leading, that's stewardship. If we are dialed into that wisdom, if we're receiving that kind of wisdom from the Lord, we're not going to be tossed to and fro by what we hear from the world. We're going to be dialed into what we're called to do. And that idea of asking in faith is not like not having any doubt. It's really important. I think it's this Peter David's guy again. Let me just make sure before I like give credit to the wrong person. Yeah. So he wrote an article for the Gospel Coalition. I feel like I reference them in every single one of my videos, but basically pointing out the fact that like the Greek word here is double-mindedness. We don't want to be tossed to and fro, have a double-mindedness. And what does double-mindedness mean? It means you have two minds. And I think we can all relate to that. I know there's one part of us that's like, I don't know, can I really trust God when he says this? And the other part of this is like all in and like, no, we always trust God. You know, we can feel the little angel and devil demon, you know, the imagery that I'm talking about that they have like in cartoons and stuff. We can feel that sometimes. We can feel double-minded. But that's not what we're called to do. We're called to have faith when we ask for wisdom. So that's not what we're called to do. We're not called to be double-minded. We need to have 100% of our loyalties dialed in on the Lord, right? Paul Copen does a really good job of specifying this. Doesn't mean that we don't doubt. I think doubt is a really huge part of just being human, of considering the options. What's the worst case scenario here? And being aware of the risk that it does take to follow the Lord in 100% faith. We still doubt and see the... So James is... I'm having such a hard time putting this to words. I feel like I have that double-mindedness of I can hear what people might want to say in response, like da 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 da, and like no one ever leaves angry comments on my Bible study videos, but still I'm just like struggling. Okay. What I'm trying to say is James condemns spiritual adultery, loving God but loving the world, loving God's wisdom but also loving the world's wisdom. The world's wisdom's easier. It's right here. I can just ask somebody for it. I don't want to have to get down on my knees, pray, wait for God to give me wisdom. That's what James condemns. He says, do not be double-minded. But he also understands that we are doubting, questioning people because that's human nature. And I think all of us understand you know, like the little imagery of the angel and the devil on our shoulders, you know, two sides arguing in our head. Even when we read the scriptures and we're like, yeah, but did God really call me to tithe 10% because my finances feel a little tight, you know, whatever it may be. So Peter Copen does a really good job of talking about this doubting aspect. And that's what I like kind of gave you the plug for in the beginning of the video. So maybe you were waiting for this. It doesn't mean we're not going to doubt, because that's part of human nature. That's actually part of human reasoning. What is important is that we don't have double-mindedness, that we're not also worshiping the world's wisdom. But to doubt is a really tricky thing. We can't just immediately condemn doubting as an overall aspect, because if you really think about it, let's say I'm doubting, but then I start to doubt, was I actually doubting? And then I doubt, should I have told you that I was doubting? Because I don't know if I was actually doubting, if I was just doubting if I was doubting. Do you see how this kind of turns over itself? And you can't even think straight after a while. But like not even that. Augustine, for example, is a great, like he is such a church hero in the history of the church and theology. And I mean, I wrote my senior thesis in college on some of his work. Like he is just, I eat up his writing, right? he struggled a lot with just the hard questions. And it didn't even result in like as if he was gonna like walk away from the faith, but he had really hard questions. And the church at the time was kind of weak when it came to questions. He's actually one of the biggest proponents to like when our youth ask questions, always give them an answer or work through an answer with them. Don't condemn them for asking hard questions, because that is actually fruit of faith. We need to create a space in the church for kids to ask hard questions. And this isn't very super PG for me to say, but we need to give them a space to ask hard questions about sex, sexuality, drugs, alcohol. We need to give them space to ask hard questions, because God is not a God of just the holy. God is a God of the questionable, of the gray areas, of the unholy. God is God over all things, and he's preeminent in all things, Colossians 1. So anyway, Augustine is a really great example of a person who really struggled and asked hard questions like, what was God doing before the creation of the world? And the church would condemn him for it. And so he's a really big proponent for saying, doubting is part of human nature. It's part of reasoning it out. It's part of thinking through the faith. And your faith is actually most of the time grown through it. It's even hard to tell if you're doubting or if you're knowing sometimes. There's a really fine line there. So in all reality, like not doubting doesn't actually mean 100% certainty. How do we know with 100% certainty that knowing requires 100% certainty? The idea falls into itself. God doesn't rebuke believers for deep inner thoughts and questions. The key is whether your heart and your mind are ruled through your wisdom and your understanding, or if they're ultimately ruled by God and his wisdom. And so at the end of the day, there are so many things. I made a video on this last week, going through hard trials. There are so many things that we are, at the end of the day, never going to get an understanding of. We're never going to understand all the facets of why hard things happen to really good people. At the end of the day, we can't see all the things, but God is God. And if he is still God on the throne in our minds, that is the safest place to ask the hard questions, because he is still God and he is still ruling over our ability to reason through things. But it's still a safe place to ask questions, and it's still okay to ask questions. So when it says to ask for wisdom in faith, that doesn't mean that you're like, but God, I don't know how you're going to give me that wisdom, and I don't know what that's going to look like, and I don't know when it's going to look like, but we do have a time period because I have to get back to these people and the answer. Like, that's not what it means. That is an okay thing to prayerfully consider and to think through. What we really need to do is have God rule our mind and our heart alone. Let me wrap this up. Maybe you're facing trials. Maybe you're going through some really hard things. You have to make some hard decisions. Maybe you're just like tired and weary. Maybe you're having an awesome season of life and this is like the best season of life of your life. Know that God is a safe place when we come to trials to go and ask for wisdom, and he is more than faithful to provide that wisdom so that we might persevere through trials with joy and with patience, obeying his word. So let me read this one more time just so it can sink into our hearts a little bit more. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. For when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything they do. Thank you guys so much for joining me today on this Bible study with me through James 1. I hope this has been encouraging. Feel free to leave questions down below. And I guess next week when we gather, we're going to talk through, I think it's like 9 through 11. Yeah, like poor and the rich. Thank you guys so much for joining me in this in-depth Bible study through James. I'm really having a lot of fun with it, and I was so encouraged by all y'all's comments at the end of last week's video. Let me know if you have any questions or specific verses or topics that you want to approach in the midst of this Bible study, or even if it was on stuff that we already covered. Love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys, stay faithful.